Hello, I'm male feminist Anders Bloom, and because all lives matter here at Thorin's channel, I give you a big welcome.
The concept of breaking up the current FaZe clan lineup in CSGO is hardly a revolutionary one. It's not like people haven't suggested it. Usually, people suggest adding talent to the team, like removing one player, maybe two players, bringing others in, maybe people retire, people just make it easy on the squad. We know the organisation itself doesn't necessarily have the funds it wants to put into CSGO, are necessarily available entirely. They've got some kind of illegal scenarios going on behind the scenes. And as you've seen, the last few signings they've done, a Dren from Gambit, obviously more recently, you've got your boy Neo from Virtus Pro. These are fairly washed up players at the moment. They're not big name signings and they're not players that of the FaZe quality of old that's supposed to come in and bang. So for my money, when you've had a core that's been together a long time like this and the form of the core has entirely degraded, they've lost their identity, they've even had, in the case of Karrigan, one of the central pieces of what made that core go disappear. I think actually it's time, and it always is time in those scenarios, to make a clean but drastic break, to make a serious, you snap the team in half, you maybe keep one player, two players, max three players, and you go elsewhere and you look for a totally new identity by bringing in totally different types of players, maybe even in just terms of form, hunger, where they're at in their careers. Because right now, it would be a miracle for this FaZe clan team to make top four at the majors. Like, look at the teams they're losing to, how hard it is for them to win big games, what it takes from some of the stars. It's real tough on that. They're not that good a team right now. I would consider them a low top 10 team, and that's mainly because of the stars. Then you consider they're probably not even going to make legends. They might do. I'd say that's more like a coin flip at this point in time, but they may not. So they'll already be in a bad position. And I think all of that, and just thinking about the identity of the team, it shows to me it wasn't just Karrigan. Like, removing Karrigan didn't make FaZe Clan better. It made them worse. Now, keeping them might not have made them better. Might not have ever brought them close again. So I wasn't against it entirely, although if I had the choice, I'd rather remove a couple of the other stars and give Karrigan another go. You saw what he's doing over in Mouse right now, but whatever. They saw it that way. That was the way as a team. They believed in it. They went with that. So, as I say, I would just try and keep whichever two you want. Let the others go. I mean, you've seen from the early 2017 phase, which to be fair had Karrigan, you can make a strong international team that's better than this squad right now, with less skill, but different players in roles that suit them more. Obviously, people think of some of the names that have been around the scene. Kolja G might be available. That'll be very expensive, though. Obviously, there's a scenario where you might have been able to get Sonny. Maybe you still can. Still a pretty good player. Could probably resurrect his career. There's players like all kinds of players like maybe Automatic from Cloud9 if he's willing to go. I mean, I'm pretty sure if each asks Jack at this point in time, Jack will release him from his prison in that sense because he's really been loyal to that org and he was also a key part in helping that org get to where they were at, one of their best players at times. One of the issues for me in the FaZe era of Olofmeister, Guardian onwards is that because a bunch of their teams after the first, let's say, 6 to 8 months weren't that world class, it weren't going to win the big tournaments necessarily, maybe extend that to like the first year. The big problem I have is they kind of siloed away so much top talent. Like at times when Olofmeister, I mean, better examples would be times when Guardian had bad tournaments or Rain was just off his game. Guardian and Rain could have gone elsewhere and been the best or the second best player on another top 5 team. Like that would have been a case. And FaZe themselves might have been even better with someone who provided more fragging than they did in their context of FaZe, but isn't necessarily an overall better player or someone you'd build around. I actually always thought the problem FaZe had was the roles. Team Liquid looked like they might have had that problem when they made their lineup in 2019, but you've seen the versatility and the ability to shift between the roles, and all the players being in key form has meant they haven't had any of the issues that FaZe Clan has, and you've seen by their map pool and their consistency, they're well above the level that even the great FaZe was, who came close, not that close overall, they had to win like 3 more tournaments probably to winning that era. So for me, one of the reasons why it's a cool topic to discuss is not actually so much on the FaZe side, but more on the side of the fact that the scene already could have been more bonkers. One of the reasons I think actually the Astralis era and the early part of the Team Liquid era now didn't look as good is because so much of the talent that used to be amazing was in these squads. I made the joke when Neo joined the team. It's like they're trying to assemble former world number 1 or world number 1 candidate players. You have Neo from 1.6. You have Guardian. Was it in CSGO? I'd argue in late 2015. You have Niko. I personally thought he was in the summer of 2016, but people would say Cold Zero, whatever. I think he was a clear second or third, him and Simple around that time. You have, obviously, Rain's been a very good player. I wouldn't say he was a candidate for the best player in the world. And Karrigan obviously doesn't count, but he wasn't in the team at that time. Have I missed someone? Olafmeister obviously was the best player in the world. Minimum once, I would say maybe twice, maybe early 2016 and maybe the majority of 2015. Well, probably like a solid 5 to 6 months at least during when Fnatic had their era. So in this squad, you take some of those players and give them to other teams, a lot of those teams get better, the scene gets stronger, and you'd have a very, very interesting and dynamic scene towards the top end. So let's look at some of the moves that could happen. They're not likely to. I'm not speculating they are. I'm just saying these are the ones that could happen if money wasn't an object, teams wanted the players and they were willing to go. So we'll go in the order of, in theory, the most, I would say the most like, not necessarily interesting, but the most desirable candidates for other teams to get, and that could have the biggest impact elsewhere. So I'll obviously have to start with Niko. Let's imagine Niko left. Could have happened already. There was literally MIBR will tell you they made an offer to Niko to join their team around the time of the whole Simple debacle. So if Niko left, obviously a problem that his career is going to be plagued by his whole career. And it's the reason why I will always on some level pull for him and always actually think he will always be undervalued by the fans is because he comes from Bosnia and a region in general that just has never produced elite teams. He has to be on an international team. There is no choice for him in terms of playing on a team that's his culture, his language, his region, basically. So luckily for him, he's an unbelievably good player. Hasn't been as sick recently, but over his career, so many international teams would want him. Obviously, people have heard the speculation, maybe 100 Thieves comes in and they get Coldzera and Niko and Sonny and they make their own new FaZe type squad. Obviously, a bunch of the NA squads, basically all of them, except for Team Liquid, in my opinion, should vie for a person like Neo if they're available. Like, if Neo becomes available, if I'm Cloud9, I literally go to him, I tell him I'll make you the highest paid player in the world with the best possible guaranteed contract. I'll build my whole team around you. I'm willing to remove anyone to have you, as long as you commit to me for, say, 2 years. If I'm someone like NRG, yeah, you've got a great lineup now, but tell you what, there's a bunch of those players I'd remove and put Niko in. Maybe someone like Ethan, and I'd go fucking ham with that boy, with that freestyle approach that they want to have. So I even think, by the way, that Stanislaw is an in-game leader that might actually work with someone like Niko. Obviously, plenty of teams there, and he would be very, very viable and probably be great in any of these teams and it'd make another top team. Then I think the next player isn't going to be Guardian, who I consider, in terms of recent form, the second greatest over the last year or so in FaZe. I actually would go with Rain, because the key thing for me with Rain is people forget this. First of all, there are many people who are, right, I'll just say some, I guess I can't speak with authority on that. Some people who are Norwegian can basically speak Danish. It's the accent, as far as I know, that throws them off, but there are similarities between the language. There's obviously a shared cultural history if you go back far enough. And it's the reason why, even though Norwegian and Swedish are more similar as language as far as I know, sometimes the accent throws them off on that one. But if you go up to some Norwegian person and say some basic Danish phrases in a non-fucked up Danish accent, the actual odds are they're going to understand you. Many of them actually can speak that language. So with the ability to go to a Danish team, and the fact that Rain's actually been pretty good at times this year, and obviously was a stud at the end of 2017, and is, by the way, a player who's very unselfish, got a good mentality. This is someone where I could see the Danish teams really benefiting from. So either North or Optic, assuming Astralis, doesn't fall up and decide they want him. But I would imagine they would stick with a Danish player. I think he would bring more than you'd lose by giving up a Danish player. And he might even be able, as I say, speak the language and communicate somewhat. And to be fair, I think he's often best in more the entry/aggressive roles anyway. So I don't know about best. I thought he was very good sometimes as kind of like the mid-round player. So I think he could even play the role and not necessarily need so much comms. So if you want a Danish team, the ideal would be North to me. Because I've seen enough of the Kirby and Yugi experiment. They're underwhelming players. They're not doing it. You take those players out and you put in Rain. Now you're starting to cook with fucking gas. Now you've got some firepower for Valde to use. Optic with MSL, I'd love to see how MSL would use him. I'm pretty sure he'd be able to make him a very, very good player in that squad. One of the contenders for potentially best in the world. They've obviously got some talent in that team. That would be an interesting one. Another option is obviously to go the Norwegian route. If you could get all the Norwegian players in the scene, you could make a team with Rubino. He's been an in-game leader in that Dignitas lineup, the one that wasn't with MSL and the Danes, the one that was Fox and Jacob, etc. And he seemed like he did an all right job. He seemed like he was willing to embrace the role. He's a smart player. I could believe he could become a good IGL potentially. Jacob obviously has been doing well in Renegades. Renegades is an Australian team. Wouldn't he like to play in a top team that was from Norway? Croman showed some potential in FaZe. I don't think he's done much since then, but whatever. He showed some potential and skill. And then, I forget what his name was, but the Sponge always says that, Sponge and Vendetta rather, always talk about this like young Norwegian Orper who's supposed to be super sick. So there's 5 players right there. Sure, it's not like the sickest team, but it allows you to go back to Norway, represent your particular country, try and be a truly legendary player from Norway, as opposed to just an extremely good player on other teams. I'll even add in one more possibility. since obviously Rain can play in international teams, and yeah, listen, sure, the NRGs and Cloud9 should approach Rain too, not quite as actively as Niko. I'll say the team no one's probably thinking about is Mouse Sports. Remember, Rain, I know for a fact, loved playing under Carrigan. Because he was one of the stars in the first lineup when Carrigan came in. Carrigan got him into the position again of being in a viable team that could potentially win events, and did. Then later on, he played his best ever Counter-Strike under Carrigan in the Olaf Guardian FaZe clan. Then obviously, he's even admitted in interviews he's kind of regrets that Guardian left, doesn't know if it was the right move, thinks it probably wasn't. So I think personally, a player like Carrigan could really make use of someone like Rain, and especially in the squad he's got now. And Rain could be the player to maybe kick them up and be a top 5 team and be very, very dangerous because he's got the superstar potential, right? I don't really know role-wise where he would fit into the mix there. I think he'd probably be removing Frozen, I think. Just a young guy, hasn't yet fully proven it as much as some of the other names there. So that's an upgrade I would do all day long. I would take that gamble myself. I don't believe in just like waiting for potential in that sense necessarily. Then I would say third is Guardian. Now listen, in terms of raw skill and overall career, Guardian should be second or maybe even first by some logic on this list, just not as much for the last few years. The problem is Guardian has said FaZe Clan will be my last team. He's implied, because he's married and he's an older player who's played 1.6 and Source and CSGO, that he might retire. So since he's a retirement risk, for me, if he leaves FaZe, the only way he keeps playing is in the way that Oscar is still playing and didn't retire, which is you go and you either play for Hellraisers, which is not a bad team. You might still be able to maybe crack top 10 and have some good performances. Obviously, if you had Oscar with you, you could fucking go ham on that as a double op setup. Or you take Oscar and you make a Slovak / Czech / I don't know if there is one more I have to add to that team from that region. You make Oscar Guardian, so potentially very good players there. You have Sticko as a supportive element, and I don't really know if he could play IGL, but maybe in this team he'd have to. You put Frozen in there if he's not in a team like Mouse. Obviously a very skilled player with a lot of potential going forwards. Maybe even bring back Zero, who I noticed came back as a player. Probably got too many fraggers and star player type guys in this, because in the Hellraisers team Zero was in 2017, there was times when he looked like the best player in the team. But interesting way you could still have a competitive side and see some of Guardian's skills, even though it wouldn't be one of the best teams. For the last two, I'm going to go in this order. Obviously, Olofmeister before Neo. Even though Olofmeister's been pretty bad the last few months, you look at Nip, you look at Fnatic, either of these teams would take Olofmeister. Either of them could probably use him. And it's probably even worth the gamble. It might even unleash him a bit more and bring him back to a higher level of form. I think he gave up a lot in his role in FaZe, even though, yes, I also don't think if you looked at his Fnatic tenure before FaZe, that he was actually suited at that point in time in his career to be an elite player again. I think it was actually the right move to give up a bit and sacrifice in order to win tournaments and potentially have an era with FaZe. So either of those teams is fine. I think in Nip, again, you'd have a very, very skilled team, because the problem was Dennis never actually actualized his skill much in that Nip lineup, even though on paper he's supposed to be very skilled. That would be interesting. Fnatic, obviously you could reunite him with some of the others. That would allay some of their concerns. Again, if he can get his form back, especially if he can be a sick entry, could see him being a strong player in that team, bump him up a couple of spots in the rankings, definitely get him back in the top 10, get him heading towards the top 5 again. The last player is obviously Neo, and at this point in time, this one should be obvious. He should either retire. I mean, if money's not a concern, go ahead and do it. Like, don't make yourself look silly anymore. Or just go and join a bad Polish team, which means a Polish team at this point in time. There just aren't any top Polish teams that are really like legit quality, like contending for top 10 at the moment. But there's plenty of talent in Poland still. There's still some good players. Neo's got the experience. He can IGL. He can do some clutching occasionally. I could see him being able to help some of those guys still be viable in the tier 2 / tier 3 scene. I probably wouldn't do that myself, but I don't know what his drive is. I don't know if he's one of those guys who doesn't want to quit. So you could see how many interesting variations you can make if you were just willing to crack the FaZe paradigm and move these pieces elsewhere. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, NateDOhDoubleG, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Dean Tanglis, Wendelful, Blunt Smoking Anus Destroyer, Daniel Olivar, Chi Mao, JDubs, Kolja G, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion and weixz. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want teasers or who the guests are for my upcoming videos? Maybe you want to take part in a monthly donator discussion with me. Well, all of these perks and more are available at the Patreon link in the description box below.